Good day, everyone. Okay, good day sa inyo. Pero sa akin is evening pa lang. Kasi gabi ko ito i-record. Rin-record. Okay, so, our first topic for our class, our subject, is an introduction to taxation. Okay? So, this discussion or this introduction applies to all types of tax. Okay, di ba? Meron tayong iba't ibang klase ng tax. We have income tax, yung subject natin ngayon. We have business tax. We have donors, estate. So, we have different kinds of taxes. Pero itong introduction na to, this applies to all kinds of taxes. Okay, so, first let's define what taxation is. Okay. So, taxation may be defined as a state power, a legislative process, or as a mode of government cost distribution. Okay. So, as a state power, taxation is the inherent power to enforce a proportional contribution from its subjects for public purpose. Okay, so taxation is one of the three inherent powers of the state. Okay, so yung inherent powers, we will be getting back to that later in the discussion. So next is yung process. Okay, so taxation is the process of levying taxes by the legislature of the state to enforce proportional contributions from its subject for public purpose. And last is the mode of government cost distribution. So the state allocates its cost or burden to its subject who are benefited by its spending. So all of those are the definition of taxation. So we move on to the theory of taxation. So bakit meron tayong tax? Bakit meron tayong taxation? Well, in a government, in a state, or in a society, the government provides services to the people. Okay, so yung mga services na to, this is in the form of education, healthcare, mga facilities, right? So mga roads and others. So government in theory gives benefit to the people. Pero ang government, it cannot exist without any funding. Okay? So saan kumuha ng pera ang government natin? So that is the theory of taxation. The government's necessity for funding is the theory of taxation. So the necessity or the need of the government for money, doon nagmula ang taxation. So in order for the government to get money for its services to the people, it gets its money from tax from the people. So next is the basis of taxation. Okay. So iba yung theory, iba naman ang basis. Okay, so the government provides benefit to the people in the form of public services, and the people provides funds that finance the government. Okay, so as you can see here in this picture, the basis of taxation is the mutual benefit of both the government and the people. Okay, so yung government, it provides public services to the people, while the people naman, it provides funding through taxes to the government. So that is the basis of taxation in theory. Okay. Next, taxpayers cannot avoid payment of taxes under the defense of absence of benefit received. Okay, so hindi natin pwedeng irason na wala tayong nare-receive ng mga benefits from the government to avoid paying taxes. Okay, so in taxation, there's always a presumption. There's always a presumption na merong na re-receive na benefits ang mga people, indirectly or directly man yan. Okay? So we cannot use that excuse to avoid paying taxes. The direct receipt or actual availment of government services is not a precondition to taxation. So hindi siya precondition yung direct receipt. Kahit indirect lang tayong na benefitan, so we still need to pay taxes. So here we have the theories of cost allocation. So we have two theories in allocating the cost of the government to the people. We have the benefit receipt theory and the ability to pay theory. So the benefit receipt theory, the more benefit he receives, the more taxes he should pay. Okay? While the ability to pay naman, it is based on their capacity to sacrifice for the support of the government. So ability to pay nga. So we are using the ability to pay. Ito yung main theory na ginagamit natin under the Philippines. So aspects of ability to pay theory. We have the vertical equity and the horizontal equity. Vertical equity directly proportional to the level of his tax base. So this is the gross concept. While the horizontal equity naman requires a consideration for the particular circumstance of the taxpayer. So this is the net concept. So ano yung mga example ng vertical equity and horizontal equity? So remember, this is aspects of ability to pay. So magkano yung ability ng mga taxpayer natin na magbayad ng mga tax. So yung under sa vertical theory, binabase natin yung babayarang tax ng mga people through his level of tax base. Okay, so ano yung tax base niya? So that is the income. Okay, so let's assume na Mrs. A and Mrs. B. So we have two taxpayers. Mrs. A and Mrs. B both earn around 200,000 per year. Okay, so 200,000 ang income nila per year. Okay, so under the vertical equity, Mrs. A and Mrs. B should both pay the same amount of tax. Kasi nga pareho silang pero yung amount nila ng income nila, right? So yung level ng tax base nila is the same. Pero under naman sa horizontal equity, sabi dito, requires consideration for the particular circumstance of the taxpayer. Okay, particular circumstance. So assuming na Mrs. A is single, while Mrs. B naman has two children with and of course his husband. Okay, so Mrs. A is single while Mrs. B has two children. So under sa horizontal equity, syempre dahil merong dalawang bata si Mrs. B, mas marami siyang papakainin, we are considering her circumstance. So under the horizontal equity, kahit na pareho yung level of tax base ni Mrs. A and Mrs. B, dahil magkaiba naman ang circumstance nila, mas malaki ang babayaran ni Mrs. A compared sa babayaran ni Mrs. B. Okay, so yun yung explanation of the horizontal equity. So here we have the lifeblood doctrine. Okay. The lifeblood doctrine states that without taxes, the government would be paralyzed for lack of motive power to activate or operate it. And taxes are the lifeblood of the government, and their prompt and certain ability are an imperious need. Okay, so yun yung lifeblood doctrine, meaning hindi magpo-function ang government kung walang taxes. Hindi magpo-function ang government kung wala silang funding, right? So in a way, taxes are the lifeblood of the government. So kung walang tax, hindi magpo-function ang government, hindi sila mabubuhay. Okay? So implication of the lifeblood doctrine of taxation. So number one, tax is imposed even if the absence of constitutional grant. Okay, so hindi necessary ang constitution para mag-impose ang tax ng government. So basta't may government, ang taxation it is automatic. Automatic na ang pag-collect ng tax basta merong government. So hindi na kailangan pang i-state sa constitution natin na kailangan mag-collect ng tax ang government natin. Number two, claims for tax exemptions are construed against taxpayers. Okay, so kapag kapag merong nag-claim ng tax exemption, mas mas strict tayo against the taxpayers. Okay, so this is against the taxpayers kung regards sa tax exemption. Kasi kung madali lang mag-avail ng tax exemption, edi mawawala ang source of funding of the government. So in cases for tax exemption, it is very strict. It is construed against the taxpayers. Number 3, the government reserves the right to choose objects of taxation. So yung government ang magpipili kung ano yung itatax nila. Kung gusto nilang i-tax ang specific na income, edi pwede na lang i-tax yon. Kung gusto nilang i-tax ang specific na business, right? For example, kung gusto na lang i-tax kung gusto ng government na mas malaki ang babayarang tax ng mga nasa alcohol industry, edi pwede nilang gawin yon. So they have the right to choose objects of taxation. Number 4, the courts are not allowed to interfere with the collection of taxes. So walang power ang court para mag-prevent ng collection of taxes. Kasi nga, this is a necessity for the government. And 5, in income taxation, income received in advance is taxable upon receipt. Okay, so under sa income taxation, ang natatax lang is yung mga income na meron tayong nare-receive na pera. Okay, so this is in reverse to accounting. Sa accounting, ang income natin, nagre-record tayo ng income kahit wala pa tayong nare-receive na pera. Pero under sa taxation, hindi income ang isang bagay kung walang perang nare-receive. So, cash is a necessity for income under taxation. There will be deduction for capital expenditures, and prepayment is not allowed as it effectively defers the collection of income tax. So, hindi pwedeng i-deduct yung mga capital expenditures. Yung capital expenditures, this is expenses for yung capital. And prepayments, this is not allowed as a deduction under taxation, under tax. Letter C, a lower amount of deduction is preferred when a claimable expense is subject to limit. Okay, so yung kapag merong claimable expense, kung pwedeng tanggalan ang income through expenses yung taxpayers, right? Kung pwede nilang tanggalan through expenses, a lower amount of deduction is preferred. So why a lower amount of deduction? Siyempre, kung lower yung amount of deduction na pwedeng i-avail ng mga taxpayers, siyempre mas malaki ang babayaran nilang tax. So that is a positive thing. That is an advantage for the government. Kasi nga gusto ng government mas marami ang babayarang tax ng mga citizens. Letter D, a higher tax base is preferred when the tax object has multiple tax bases. Okay, so kapag merong siyang multiple tax base ang isang taxpayer, meaning iba't iba ang natatax. Merong iba't ibang objects na matatax sa isang taxpayer, a higher tax base is preferred. So, a higher tax base para mas malaki ang babayarang tax ng taxpayer. As I said, that pag mas malaki ang tax, that is a good thing for the government. So, yun. Nagbabalik tayo sa inherent powers of the state. That is sa first definition kanina, yung inherent power. So, inherent powers of the state, we have 3 inherent powers. We have taxation power, we have police power, and we have power of eminent domain. Okay, so, all of these 3 are the inherent powers of the state. So, what is taxation power? This is the power to enforce proportional contributions from its subjects to sustain itself. Okay, so this is the power to enforce proportional contributions. So, power to enforce to enforce na pwede nating enforce yung mga citizens natin na magbayad para sa funding ng government. So that is taxation. Next is police power. Police power is power to enact laws to protect the well-being of the people. So when we say police power, this is always for the well-being of the people. Well, in theory at least. So this is for the well-being of the people. While eminent domain naman, this is to take private property for public use after paying just compensation. Okay, so under sa eminent domain, this is a power of the government to take private property. Okay, pwede silang kumuha ng private property for public use. Okay, so gagamitin nila yon for public use after paying just compensation. So, magbabayad sila ng just compensation. So, ano yung just compensation? So, this is yung deemed nila yung sa kanila is that is a proper amount to pay for the property na kinuha nila. So, wala siyang basis. Yung just lang, just. So, these rights dubbed as powers are natural, inseparable, and inherent to every government. So, basta meron ng government, meron automatic na present ng tatlong powers na to. So, hindi na kailangan ng mga constitution, ng mga laws for the government to have these powers. So, this is inherent to its presence, yung government. So, we have here the similarities of the three powers of the state. One, necessary attributes of sovereignty. Okay, so basta sovereign ang state, this three is necessary for a state to be called sovereign. Number two, inherent to the state. Okay, so kaya nga tinawag na inherent powers. This is all inherent. Number three, legislative in nature. Okay. Number four, ways in which the state interferes with private rights and properties. So, all of those three powers are ways in which the state or the government or the Philippines interferes with private rights and private properties. Number five, exist independently of the Constitution and are exercisable by the government even without constitutional grant. So, yun nga, hindi necessary ang Constitution, hindi necessary ang mga laws for the government or the state to have these three powers. Number six, presuppose an equivalent form of compensation received by the persons affected by the exercise of the power. So, for the three powers, there is a supposed equivalent form of compensation. So, under the taxation power, yung in exchange for the power to contribute in exchange for the contribution of the people, the government provides services, public services. Yun ka natin. While sa police power, under sa police power, wala siyang compensation, pero ang equivalent form of compensation sa police power, yung well-being ng people, that in itself is the compensation na. So, wala talagang physical na ma-receive yung mga tao. While sa eminent domain naman, meron siyang just compensation. So, yung just compensation, that is the equivalent compensation for the state to take private property. Number 7, the exercise of these powers by the local government units may be limited by the national legislature. Okay, so all of these are the similarities. What is now the scope of taxation power? So, we have yung scope ng taxation power, apat, comprehensive, plenary, unlimited, and supreme. Okay, so wala na tayong explanation for all of this. Just memorize this four. Okay, so uh, we say that, okay, so even though we say that taxation is unlimited, right, kahit sinasabi natin ang scope ng taxation is unlimited. So, anything na gusto ng government, pwede niyang i-tax. There are still limitations. Kahit ibang gulo, kahit na unlimited ang scope ng taxation, there are still limitations naman. So, these limitations are inherent limitations and constitutional limitations. Okay, so under the inherent limitations, we have 5 inherent limitations. We have territoriality of taxation, international committee, public purpose, exemption of the government, and non-delegation of the taxing power. Okay, so under territoriality of taxation, public services are normally provided within the boundaries of the state. Okay, so yung yung tax, the power of taxation is only limited to the boundaries of the state. So in this case, boundaries of the Philippines. Okay, so syempre hindi naman natin pwedeng i-tax yung mga income yung nasa US. Right? Hindi naman natin pwedeng i-tax yung income ni LeBron James, yung income ni Steph Curry, right? Because the power of taxation is only limited to the boundaries of the state. Okay, so number 2, international committee. Okay, so ang international committee, no country is powerful than the other. Okay, so it is by principle, each country observes international committee or mutual courtesy or reciprocity between each countries. Okay, so hence, government do not tax the income and properties of other governments, and governments give primacy to their treaty obligations over their own domestic taxes. Okay, so yung international committee, it just means that ang government hindi siya pwedeng mag-tax ng other government. Okay, so meron kasi yun lang. Yun yung meaning ng international committee. Number 3, public purpose. Okay, public purpose. So, tax should be for public purpose only. Okay, it is intended for the common good of all people. So there should be, taxation should not be used for private purpose, but instead for public purpose only. So that is in theory. Number 4, exemption of the government. Siyempre, the government cannot tax itself, right? So kapag merong income ang government, yung income na yun, that is not subject to tax. Okay, siyempre, ang income ng government hindi na siya subject sa tax. That is redundant kasi yung tax that is also a form of income of the government. So the government is exempt from taxation. Number 5, non-delegation of the taxing power. Okay, so the legislative taxing power is vested exclusively in the Congress and is non-delegatable pursuant to the doctrine of separation of branches of the government to ensure a system of checks and balances. Okay, so exclusive lang siya sa Congress and hindi siya pwedeng i-delegate sa other branches of the government. So hindi siya pwedeng magmula sa Senate, sa Supreme Court, President, hindi pwede yun. It was only for Congress. And here we have the constitutional limitations. Okay? Tingnan nyo naman, marami. 16 ang constitutional limitations compared naman sa inherent limitations na 5 lang. Right? So, okay, so let's discuss briefly each and every one of it. Okay, so number 1, due process of law. Okay, so no one should be deprived of his life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Tax law should neither be harsh nor oppressive. So yun, that is uh, the explanation for due process of law. Number two, equal protection of the law. Okay, so no person shall be denied of the equal protection of the law. Taxpayers should be treated equally, both in terms of rights conferred and obligations imposed. Okay, so the rule applies where taxpayers are under the same circumstance and conditions. This requirement would mean Congress cannot exempt sellers of balot while subjecting sellers of penoy to tax since they are essentially the same goods. Okay, so dapat equal ang treatment ng government under sa taxation. Okay, so kung hindi pwedeng ma-exempt ang isang tao kung natatax naman yung isa. Basta yung ano nila, yung nature of income nila is the same. Okay? Number three, uniformity rule in taxation. So the rule of taxation should be uniform and equitable. Taxpayers under the similar circumstance should not be taxed the same. Okay, so yun nga sa explanation ko kanina, the tax should consider the circumstance of every taxpayer, right? So like Mrs. A and Mrs. B, si Mrs. A single, Mrs. B meron siyang dalawang anak. So it should it is uniform and equitable dapat. So it should consider circumstance of the people. Yeah, it should also consider the tax base. So yun yung meaning ng uniformity rule. Okay, so pasensya na kayo, hirap i-explain ko nga to. Number 4, progressive system of taxation. Okay, so ang ginagamit ng Congress is progressive system. Okay, so merong kasi tayong iba't ibang systems of taxation. So, ang ginagamit natin is progressive, meaning as the tax base increases, the tax rate also increases. Okay, so habang lumalaki yung income natin, mas lalaki naman ang tax rate na babayaran natin. Right? So 200 yung babayaran ng may income na 250,000 is mas maliit compared sa babayaran ng tax ng income na yung may income na 500,000. So ganun. Habang lumalaki yung income or the tax base, mas lalaki naman ang tax rate. That is the progressive system of taxation. Number 5, non-imprisonment for non-payment of debt or full tax. Okay, so sa ano kasi, as a policy kasi, no one shall be in prison. No one shall be in prison because of his poverty. Okay? So meaning, one cannot in prison because dahil hindi siya nakabayad ng utang niya. So hindi ka makukulong kung hindi ka nakabayad ng utang mo. However, this is only for debt and not tax. Okay? So kung hindi ka magbabayad ng tax, you can be in prison. Okay? Kasi ang tax hindi siya debt. Ang exemption lang dito is poll tax. Okay? Kung hindi ka makabayad ng poll tax, hindi ka makukulong. Okay? Number 6, non-impairment of obligation and contract. Okay, so the state should set an example of good faith among its constituents. It should not set aside its obligations from contracts by the exercise of its taxation power. Tax exemptions granted under contract should be honored and should not be cancelled by a unilateral government action. So, ganun. I cannot explain it. Basta non-impairment of obligation and contract. Number 7, free worship rule. Okay, so the Philippine government adopts free exercise of religion and does not subject its exercise to taxation. So, ang pag-exercise ng religion natin, hindi siya subject sa taxation. So, ganun yung free worship rule. Number 8, exemption of religious or charitable entities, non-profit cemeteries, churches and most mosques, diyan mo di translation na, lands, buildings, and improvements from property taxes. So all of these are exempt from property taxes, yung lahat ng mga binanggit. So religious or charitable entities, non-profit cemeteries, churches, and listing, lands, buildings, and improvements. So basta concerned siya sa religion or basta concerned siya sa religion, hindi they are not subject to property taxes. Number 9, non-appropriation of public funds or property for the benefit of any church, sect, or system religion. Okay. This is to highlight the separation between the state and the religion. Okay. So, basta government should not favor any particular system of religion by appropriating public funds or property in support thereof. So, the government cannot they cannot set aside funds for a specific religion. So hindi sila pwedeng mag-set aside ng isang fund for the Roman Catholics. Hindi sila pwedeng mag-set aside for the INCs, so and others and others. So yun yung ibig sabihin ng appropriation of public funds. Number 10, exemption from taxes of the revenues and assets of non-profit, non-stock educational institutions including grants, endowments, donations, or contributions for educational purposes. So, hindi subject sa tax ang mga revenues and assets of mga educational institution. Basta non-profit and non-stock sila. Okay? So, hindi sila subject sa tax as long as it is for educational purposes. Okay? Number 11, concurrence of a majority of all members of Congress for the passage of a law granting exemption. So, kailangan ng majority of all members of the Congress para mag-grant ng tax exemption ang isang individual. Number 12, non-diversification of tax collections. So, ano yun? Non-diversification. Tax collections should be used only for public purpose. It should never be diversified or used for private purpose. So, ganun yung explanation. Number 13, non-delegation of the power of taxation. So, nabanggit ko na ito kanina. The principle of checks and balances in a republican state requires that taxation power as part of lawmaking be vested exclusively in the Congress. Okay, so it is vested exclusively in the Congress. So as you can see, this is the same as the inherent sa dito, number 5. Number 14, non-impairment of the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court to review tax cases. Okay, so the existence of the Court of Tax Appeals, which is a special court, all cases involving taxes can be raised to and finally be decided from the Supreme Court of the Philippines. So, kahit hindi sila pwedeng mag-interfere, pwede silang mag-judge, pwedeng mag-review ang Supreme Court ng mga tax cases. Wala lang silang power na mag-prevent na mag-collect ang tax ang government. Number 15, the requirement that appropriations, revenue, or tariff bills shall originate exclusively in the House of Representatives, but the Senate may propose or concur with amendments. So, di ba under the non-delegation of the power of taxation, the power of taxation is vested exclusively to the Congress. So, pero the Senate may propose or concur with amendments. So, pwede silang magbigay ng mga amendments sa mga tax laws natin. Pero dapat mag-originate pa rin sa House of Representatives or sa Congress. Number 16, the delegation of taxing power to local government units shall exercise the power to create its own source of revenue and shall have a just share in the national taxes. Okay, so yun. All of these are the constitutional limitations. So this is imposed by the Constitution. While sa inherent limitations naman, this is just inherent to the taxing power. Hindi na kailangan ng Constitution uh, para para sabihin yung mga limitations na to. Okay? So, yun. That will be all for today, class. Uh, we will be continuing our discussion for the introduction of tax next meeting. So, I will be giving you, bibigay ko naman yung mga babasahin nyo. So, please read your notes para mas maintindihan nyo. Okay? So, that will be all, class. Thank you and goodbye.